Thank you, Lan. I hope everyone can hear me and see the screen. My name is Pierre Chandon. I'm from INSEAD, and I'm delighted to be here to present the results of the study that we conducted here with a bunch of co-authors, three of us being named Pierre. It's a very French group, where we looked at the effects of front-of-pack labels on the nutritional quality of supermarket food purchases. And so I don't need to really tell you that obesity is a big issue, but the one thing that you may not realize is that even in countries like France, which you can see here in purple, that historically had a low obesity levels, the numbers are going up. It's true in every rich country. And so in this context, the French government asked us to help them select the best front-of-pack nutrition labels that they would endorse and implement. However, beyond that, this very specific regulatory questions we had to answer, this study allowed us to look at more general questions, starting simply with, do these labels actually work? Do they actually improve the nutritional quality of the purchases that people make in supermarkets in real life? If so, do they work by helping sell more of the good products or by selling less of the bad products, or both? And also, what happens to the products that are not labeled? Because by EU law, you cannot force these front-of-pack labels on brands that don't want them. And also more generally, especially for someone like me who's more of a lab experimentalist, the question this study allows us to answer is, do the results that we run in lab studies, do they actually replicate in the real world, in supermarkets? And finally, for those of you who may be interested in collaborating with governments and companies, what are some of the key takeaways on how best to approach that? So the thing that you have to realize is that there is currently intense pressure on the food industry. I was recently at a conference in Cambridge at the School of Medicine, and public health and nutrition specialists, they have totally given hope about self-regulation. The discussion was not whether we should tax, because it was obvious yes. The question was, should we force food companies to implement white plain packaging, like it's done for tobacco, or should we actually add on those packaging disgusting images with needles and toothless smiles and stuff like that, which we know from studies really work. So there's intense pressure, and politicians who typically tended to worry more about jobs and like Boris Johnson here, free markets, have also changed. We can see here Boris Johnson. I love this photo because he was visiting a sausage factory, and he said that he was insanely proud to have a sausage named after him. Well, after he almost died of COVID because of his obesity, his attitudes really changed, and he started to say, we need to take obesity seriously. And I was actually surprised myself to be invited by 10 Downing Street at some point to discuss and brainstorm about innovative ways to fight obesity. And it's not just in rich Western countries. Chile, for example, has implemented the most stringent sets of regulations against food marketing. For example, even if you buy products from a street vendor, it's not just Chile, it's also Peru and Mexico. It comes with all of these black labels that says, don't buy, high in salt, high in sugar, high in fat. And they've banned the advertising of for food products between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., et cetera, et cetera. So this is the situation in which we are. And in this situation, lots of different companies and researcher groups have developed lots of ways to grade food in terms of nutritional quality. The problem is we don't know which of these labels actually work best. Ina Ikonen and her colleagues just published a really interesting meta-analysis, which said that, look, if we want to influence attitudes, we know which label works best. But if we want to influence actually choice and consumption, we just don't know. The other thing is, most of these studies were conducted in a lab. And Romain Cadario and I, we just published in Marketing Science a meta-analysis of healthy eating nudges in the field, in supermarkets, in restaurants. And what we found is that among all the 7 nudges, which I won't describe here, the only one that really did not work is nutrition labeling. Descriptive labeling, at best, you can expect to have the equivalent of 5 sugar cubes reduction in energy intake per day. With evaluative labeling, 9. It's really tiny results, which really make this study necessary. All right, let's move to the study. And first thing to know is we tested 4 different kinds of labels. The first one is the British multiple traffic lights label. As you can see, it is nutrient specific. You have a color, green, amber, or red, for salt, for sugar, for fat, etc. A lot of details. The other one that we tested is the French Nutri-Score system, which gives one summary score, one grade, from A to E, from green to deep orange, not red. And there were 2 other systems which also were tested. One is, if you want the least prescriptive one, because it's only one color, only blue, and it basically lists at the nutrient level the percentage daily requirement from consuming one portion of the food. Finally, there was another French label developed also by nutritionists, which also is color-coded, but in addition provided behavioral recommendations, telling people, you can consume it occasionally or in small quantity. So these were the 4 contenders. And what we did was, with a collaboration of 3 retail chains, we actually implemented this really large-scale randomized control trial in 60 supermarkets. We basically had 4 groups of 10 supermarkets. Each group implemented one of the 4 labels for 10 weeks. And then we have one control group of 20 supermarkets that didn't do anything. So that's no label condition. We made sure they were in different parts of France, matching on socioeconomic indicators. And it's usually complex study to run. We hired 60 research assistants. Each of them had a mobile label printer. They would actually go inside the supermarket, scan the product, and then it would print the sticker with the logo, which was put then on the products. Each of them was supervised by the dietitians, who were themselves supervised by auditors, who were themselves supervised by the French Fraud Prevention Board. This was a €2 million study, paid half by the industry and half by the national health system. This is the way it looked like in the store. Here's an example for Nutri-Score. You can see the physical stickers being put on the products. So this is a D, this is an A. There were also some displays explaining to consumers what's going on in their stores. And overall, we actually put 1.9 million stickers on 1,200 products in 4 product categories and collected data over 10 weeks of 1.6 million purchases. The data came from the retailers. It's the individual level data of the loyalty card holders. And to make sure that no stone was left unturned, there was a huge committee of 15 people, nutritionists, economists, psychologists, even a few marketers, and a different subgroup did the implementation. So a different group did the design and different group did the study, which had to be done really quickly because there was a French election going on. Super complex governance, because we had to make sure everybody was involved, the consumer groups, the civil society, scholarly associations. Don't need to read all that, but just to say, they tried really hard to get everybody on board, consumers, industry, etc. And the result was a total failure. I mean, as a researcher, okay, I had my name with my colleagues on the front page of Le Monde, which is a newspaper of record, like you should say the New York Times, in which they said 6 out of the 10 so-called experts involved in the study have links with the industry. What do they mean by that? There was actually an infographic. You can see, my name here. Why? Because, I gave talks unpaid in some conferences, or I received money from research association for research, which I can tell you as a researcher was really hard and totally new, but colleagues in nutrition are used to that. For us, it was kind of strange. And the result was there were many people who just disliked so much being labeled as being conflicted that many people resigned and even wrote in a political science paper based on this whole thing. So very different from the kind of studies we're used to running. Now let's talk about the science, not just the politics. The science, first of all, the DV, to measure nutritional quality, was based on a British scoring system called the FSA nutrient profiling system, which does the following. It takes into account all the bad things in the food sugar, fat, and sodium, and all the good things, fibers and protein. And then there's an algorithm, highly nonlinear with thresholds that gives a score. It's a score, it's important, that's per 100 grams. So it's not portion-based. It tells you the quality of the food. It's regardless of the quantity, which goes from -15 for the best to +40 for the worst. So it's reversed. And the reason we use that score is that it's been shown in prospective studies to be a good predictor of things such as the onset of diabetes and different kinds of cancers, etc., in France. But honestly, I think other scores would have given the same thing, but this one is the one that was validated. So that's the DV, that's the measure of nutritional quality. The method itself is a very simple definitive, okay? So we had individual level purchase data, all the purchases made by the loyalty card holders during the intervention and the year before. And what we said was we took card holders that had purchased at least once in the category in the year and the year before, average treatment effect using a definitive. As a control variables, we only had the price of the products and the number of purchases made by the consumer. And we have two analyses I'll show you. The simplest one is just looking at purchase, the number of purchases of products with high, medium, low, or unlabeled nutritional quality. The second analysis is looking at the basket of products. Okay, in this category, if you look at all the products that were bought, did the average nutritional quality improve or not? This has become clearer when I show you the results. So on the y-axis here, you have the change in weekly purchases in the treated stores compared to the control stores. And here on the x-axis, you can see for each label, starting with Nutri-Score, what we did was we trichotomized the products in each category into those with high, medium, or low nutritional quality, and those without a label. These are the results. Okay, first, the good news. On average, the top tier of the products saw an increase of 14% in the number of purchases. And now the bad news, which is that products with a medium and low nutritional quality saw absolutely no effect, as did products with no label. However, if we look at the other system, is the same thing where it really helps the good one, but less, not statistically significant for British multiple traffic light, even less for Sens, and all over the place, and really bizarre for the last one. So based on this analysis, we can see that Nutri-Score is the best or the least worst, if you want, of the four products. Why? Because at least it's ordered in the way you would expect. You don't want products, or labels that actually help sell more of the bad stuff. That's not the goal. And so this is the analysis overall across all categories. Now, if we look at the analysis at the level of the average baskets. So here what we did was we looked at the change in the average FSA score. And remember, this score is a little bit weird, is that negative is good, a low score is good. And so a reduction is a good thing. So overall, if you look at the basket of products weighted by the amount of products purchased, what we see is that Nutri-Score led to a 2.5% reduction, i.e. improvements in nutritional quality, which is equivalent of 0.14 FSA points. Despite 1.9 million observations, though, this effect was only statistically significant at the 10% level. A lot of variation and a tiny reduction. I think in the paper we said disappointingly modest, because we're hoping, of course, for better. The other system, the British one, is almost as good, and the other two are clearly lower. So what we can see here is that the effect is not as high as you would expect. The question that's interesting as well is, okay, was it worth doing all of these studies in 60 supermarkets, spending all this money? What's interesting is that in parallel, a different study was conducted, a really high quality lab experiment, which I'll show you in a moment. Oh yeah, because I forgot, I wanted to also say this. The effects were not uniform across categories. The effects were the strongest for fresh prepared foods. And you can see a really strong correlation between the size of the effect and the lower here, the better. And the dispersion of nutrition quality within the category. To state it simply, for products like pastries or bread, where it's pretty obvious that, one product has a lot more butter than the other, none of the labels actually made any difference because people already knew. There's no news really. The only category in which there was a bit of an effect were categories like, these would be salads, ready-to-eat salads, because, there are salads, so they look healthy, but in reality, they have a lot of perhaps cheese and vinaigrettes and croutons, etc., and there are big differences across the products. So the effects was modest in overall, a bit better in those categories where they actually added information. And now the question of the comparison with the lab study. So there was a really high quality study which looked at the same labels. And the way they did that in the lab was to ask people to make a shopping trip and choose products. It was incentive compatible that some people selected or actually had to pay some of the products they bought. It was based on the paper catalog. And then they did another purchase right after, and this time with the nutrition labels. Same labels, same DV, same diff and diff method. And so the question is, do we find the same results in the field and in the lab? So first, the good news. The ordering of the top two, the two really best, was the same in the field and in the lab. Number 4, number 3 were reversed. Doesn't matter because they were really bad ones to begin with. I don't want to say bad, but not as effective. But ready for the bad news? If you looked at the effect size, in the lab, on average, the effect size was between 12, 19, and 42 times stronger than in the field. So this tells us that the lab studies are good at ranking these 4 systems. But when it comes to extrapolating effect sizes, for example, studies trying to extrapolate how many deaths would be avoided by implementing the stores, really, we can't do that. They are just overly optimistic. As you and I know, there's a huge difference in when we make food purchases, when someone is watching, and when we make purchases in real life, in the supermarkets, tired with kids pestering. So some questions about impact, because you're asking about whether this has flair and charm and impact. So there's some impact in terms of publication, but I really want to focus on the impact on the field, because this is a practice prize. And so the first impact was that, based on our analysis, the French ministers of health, the Minister of Agriculture and Finance, got together and endorsed Nutri-Score as the label that would be allowed in France. So that was already, a big deal. Fortunately, it was not just government endorsement, it was actually followed by companies. So not everyone, at first, only the healthiest food companies, those with the healthiest portfolios, like Danone, and also the retailers decided to participate. It's very important that the retailers participate. Because something I forgot to mention, which was in the slide, is that once you agree to participate for your brand, your private label, you must put the Nutri-Score on all of your products, not just the good ones. All of your products have to have it, including those rated C, D, or E. Then, and this was really a turning point, those companies that were totally against the Nutri-Score system, Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Kellogg's had created their own alternative system, which was actually based on measuring at the portion level, which in a way makes sense, right? Because no one eats 100 grams of Nutella. However, the problem was that if you look at 15 grams of Nutella, which is the recommended portion size, that it made Nutella look really good. And the media just didn't pass the sniff test. People said, I cannot trust a system that rates Nutella highly. So they gave up and they joined Nutri-Score. So latest data I was able to find in at the end of last year, in France, Nutri-Score is available is used by 700 to 800 companies which account altogether for 57% of the markets of food in volume sold in supermarkets. Nutri-Score also now mandatory in food advertising, print, TV, online, it has to be there. And we are still continuing to study it. There's big fights at the European level. So Nutri-Score has been endorsed by France, Benelux, Spain, etc. But there are many other countries, including Italy, and I'm half Italian, so it hurts me. But that say they're against it. Why? Because many of the traditional Italian foods, for example, whether it is olive oil, etc., because oil is 100% fat by design, they're rated low on Nutri-Score. And countries that have also products that have, like France as well, very strict recipes. You cannot make camembert a different way. They say they have a disadvantage because companies cannot reformulate to improve the Nutri-Score. And at the same time, there's now talk and research trying to extend the system beyond supermarkets. And so, for example, myself, I'm running a study right now, testing Nutri-Score in, I don't have a slide here, I thought I had, Nutri-Score in Pomme de Pain, which is a chain of sandwich restaurants, a bit like Subway. Others are testing them in workplace cafeterias or on Uber Eats and places like that. Okay, conclusions. The first conclusion, I think, is, as any parent knows, food preferences are hard to change. Okay, if you compute the Cohen's d, the effect size is 0.02. So no matter how you look at it, it's a tiny effect. Now, of course, the debate is tiny effects at the population level for health could actually translate into important positive effects in the long term, which is totally true. The other thing that's for us to remember is these informational nudges, they actually help the good foods in ambiguous categories. And the reason they do that is because typically they help foods that are bought by consumers who are more highly educated and who care about these things. And that's a problem because we would hope that they would reduce the sales of products with low nutritional quality. And however, that's not the case. In fact, in Chile, for example, in some places, they actually found that nutritional labels, they help in categories that are ambiguous, but they backfire in categories like ice cream, where people say, oh, the more labels, the fatter the ice cream, then the tastier it must be, because no one buys ice cream for health anyway. The other thing that's interesting is that there's no effect on unlabeled food. And that's interesting theoretically, because it means that consumers use these labels as additional information to be able to judge the food. But it doesn't change their preferences or the decision-making process, because it doesn't influence generally how they make choices for the unlabeled food. Because you could have imagined that it would have made maybe nutrition more important, and would have led people to turn the package and see in the back where the nutrition information is always present, but that's not what happened. Finally, a simple summary score is the best. Simplicity is key. Even though, of course, from a nutrition point of view, it's kind of heroic to be able to compensate salt with sugar and fat. This is what people want, and a score like Nutri-Score that shows you not just whether you're rated B or C, but shows the range. It shows it goes from A to E. You can see where you are compared to the rest. That's very effective. That's what we found. Now, here's a paradox we're studying for all the marketing scientists and you guys doing structural models here. By and large, like I said, very modest effects on demand. Yet, very, very strong effects on supply. I mean, to my surprise, every time I talk to food companies, they're either really panicking about the effects of Nutri-Score. They think that it's the end of the day, they are going to go bankrupt, or they're really, really busy, those who can, reformulating the products to get a better score. So I think this is really worth exploring. And I have a few tentative hypotheses. I think partly it's simply that once you provide a metric, all the food scientists there will just want to beat it. And so we have like Nesquik breakfast cereals, which is Nutri-Score A now. For breakfast kids cereal, best score you can get because of added fiber, etc. Perhaps another way, though, and maybe a more optimistic conclusion, is that these companies actually do care about true nutritional quality. And here's a little teaser for a paper that's forthcoming in JAMS, where we actually find that in the US, in the cereal category, we have a disproportionate number of cereals that continue to mention that they're low in fat, low in sugar, and low in calories, even though consumers have moved away from these diet products. And we see this happening especially in private companies that have mission-driven to improve nutrition. So maybe that's why companies continue to reformulate food, even though in some categories, at least based on our studies, the effects are pretty slow. Now, just for you guys interested in collaborating with governments for these kinds of studies, I think there are a few takeaways here. The first one would be that it's so much work. I mean, I checked, I have 2,000 emails maybe around that study. It is so complex that it's only worth doing if you're looking at something really big. And so we have a tendency as scientists to try to be very reductionist. We want to look at the effects of color and then the effects of maybe the range. What happens if you go from 4 to 5 categories? Forget it. You have to look at big changes. And of course, the flip side is that you won't really be able to tell why Nutri-Score is better than the others. But at least you'll be able to tell whether it worked or not. Because in real life, especially for food, it's so hard to change actual behaviors. Number two, I think the value of these studies is really to look at effect sizes, okay? And which means not doing a short-term study, looking at the effects on the long term, because they certainly are decaying. There's a curiosity effect at first. The media talks about it. But the crux of whether it works is whether it works over the long term. It's very important to establish clear governance. Even though we had done this, we still got into a lot of unpleasant accusations. And so pre-registering the study and the outcome, making sure you're not directly funded, certainly not by the food industry, because everyone thinks, somehow they're the bad guys and they will influence you, which of course we have knowledge that it has happened in the past. Be careful about lobbying. Lobbying can come from all ends. It can come also from the researchers who have designed the label and they really like it. And so they could be pressuring you. And then also one thing I've learned is that even though sometimes you run studies where the CEO is involved, the key person in the organization, the retailer that you really need to be friend with is the data security people, because they're the ones who will give you access to the data. But finally, I think the good news for all of us here is that this was a study in which at the beginning there were a bunch of epidemiologists and doctors and nutritionists, and in the end, it's us, Paulo and I, and also the economists from INRA, Olivier and Pierre, etc., that actually did the study. And I would say, I think marketing has something to contribute to this. This is a marketing problem, right? And we, in the end, were listened to. Expect that it's not going to be always smooth. As soon as you look at an issue that's very contentious, there will be haters. And also don't expect that's going to lead to an easy publication, but that's a different story. I think I'm right on time, so I will stop now and I'll be happy to take questions if there are any.
Very interesting talk. So we'll open the floor for questions. We can start with a question from the judges, and after that, if I have extra time, we'll open up the floor for the audience.
Pierre, it was great. There's one thing you said I disagree with. You said that no one eats 100 grams of Nutella. I'm not sure that's true. So
okay, we don't even agree about whether Nutella is a he or a she in French, So no, German does the same.
So maybe, so I think, I wonder whether, as you said, this is a long-term project, maybe 10 weeks, maybe you would have maybe seen stronger effect if you had longer time window. I mean, that it's already great you were able to run this for 10 weeks. I just wonder maybe whether that was partly responsible for the modest effect. And also maybe one hypothesis is, so my kids and I actually last year in France were having a lot of fun discussing the Nutri-Score. I didn't know you were involved. I would tell them now, they would be very impressed. But I think one of the benefits also it's a bit subjective. You know, it's not just the raw data. So it's also a way to create conversation. So you know, why is this an A? Why is this a B or C? And actually, it's for us. I mean, they're just you know, anecdotally, these really study conversations about nutrition, because you know, and so I wonder if there's a bit of that might be a little bit the reason why also this works better is the ambiguity a little bit actually gets people engaged and they want to understand why the grade was yeah, you know, just maybe a hypothesis to be tested maybe in the lab.
Yeah, interesting. I totally agree that the design aspect is really important. The fact that it looks a bit like the energy rating that you see on the fridge, you know, I think everyone understands, you know, from green to not red, by the way, because red means don't buy, but it was really dark orange. I think that's very important, like a tricolor, and maybe the fact that it's not objective, as in the sense that it doesn't give you a percentage or number, unlike some of the other ones, could create a conversation. You know, in general, what's interesting is people love Nutri-Score. You know, even in the fast food restaurants, when I'm running the studies, you like to have 90% people are in favor. It doesn't mean they actually change their behavior. And going back to your earlier question, why 10 weeks? First of all, it was supposed to be 3 months, but you know, the first 2 weeks for things to get in place, so we didn't look at those. And then it was really a shot in the dark because you're trying to look at the power, but it's really hard to know. We didn't anticipate the effects to be that small. And definitely a longer period would have been better. However, on our period, at least, we didn't see any significant decay effects. So I don't know that the effects would have been much stronger later. However, what I agree with is that if we want to look at the total effect, it's not enough to look at the effect on demand. You will need to model the effect on supply because there will be reformulation. And so overall, I think the effects will be much stronger than what I presented today, just looking at the demand side.
So we have 3 hand raised. So we start with Rob, Phil, then Brian, given the order.
You gotta find the mute button. This is super cool. The scale of it was awesome. I like seeing the picture of it actually in practice, which is where my question comes from. So one thought that I had when looking at the pictures was that the labels, the stickers that they were sticking onto them could be like anywhere on the package. Whereas like when I'm going to look at the nutrition of a package in the US, at least I know exactly where to look. It looked like that's the same kind of in the supermarkets where it was in the bottom left corner more often than not. And I wonder if for things that are maybe less healthy, the packaging is smaller, it's harder to find a place to put the label that looks like where you would expect it to be. And I just wonder, like, was there any kind of checking to see if the labels were usually in the same place, right? Or was one person sticking the Nutella label on the back, someone else was sticking it on the lid, someone else was putting it on the side, like rotated 90 degrees, and it's harder to read. Was there like consistency on how they were placed?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question. So I think quality control was really a key part here. And it's something that we usually, at least as an experimentalist, we don't usually worry too much about it because, you know, we show stuff on Qualtrics and we know people will see it. But in real life, you're right. That's why we had not just research assistants putting the stickers, but they were checked by dietitians who were checking that they had put the right stickers, who were themselves checked by another layer to make sure that there were no problems. So no one put the stickers on the back. Whether they put it on top or bottom, we selected categories that were big enough where you could put the stickers. Because on chewing gum, for example, it would be hard. On frozen food, they would leave. So yes, I think that's an issue. And it's also one of the reasons why Nutri-Score, I think, wins, is because it's smaller, it's easier to see. You don't need your glasses and things like that. The design is very important. But quality control, I think we did a good job overall.
Yeah, the one thing I was thinking of is like maybe less healthy products tend to be smaller, right? So it's like harder to find a place for the label. And if that like is in fact like how like maybe healthier products are more often bigger, it's easier to kind of like put the label on. Don't know if that's true, but
no, I actually we checked that. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. For example, in the study in Subway's, you know, the sandwich stores, we find that you either have a really big sandwich full of salad or a small one full of bacon. So actually, it's not the size and the is not correlated with the healthiness. Cool. If you look at like at least, you know, it's a good point that, but to the best of my
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Phil, you're next.
Thanks, Lan. Thanks, Pierre. What a stunning paper, the amount of work that you guys have done on this and the important topic. There's so much to like here. One of the things that I've been puzzling over is, on the one hand, you find evidence that these effects on demand are very small. And yet you also show that there's been a lot of adoption of this. I think you said that 57% of the market has now adopted it. And so to me, those feel like they're a little bit at odds with each other. You know, like, is your insight from this that these kinds of labeling policies, while ineffective in impacting customers in the short run, are important to implement because somehow in ways that are a little bit ambiguous and vague, it will actually cause change all on the supply side, even though customers are not responsive to it. And so I feel like I'm not really sure in my own head whether, like, should we be going around the world saying you have to do this, even though your paper says, actually, it doesn't really have much effect. And so I'm sort of conflicted about what the bottom line is.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I think transparency matters. You know, consumers have a right to know. They want to know. So, you know, consumers want Nutri-Score, and that's 99% of the reason why brands are putting there. Number two, the fact that it doesn't really make a big difference also explains where they put it there. Because, like, okay, fine, you know, I'll put it. It won't change much. But I think more generally, you're right. And in fact, the team behind Nutri-Score, they always expected the effects to be more on the supply side than on the demand side. And so, and I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that, in fact, I'm in favor of Nutri-Score, even though the effects are not as high as would have hoped, because consumers have a right to know, they want it. Companies also feel they're doing the right thing. And overall, I think it's not just because something has no effect on demand that it's not implemented, which I think, you know, for you guys who are doing theory is maybe something worth exploring better, trying to understand exactly why they're doing it. But I really feel, just at the very basic, all the people I meet in the food industry, they just don't want to be the bad guy. You know, they want to help. They're not there to make us fat. They're just trying to make a living and innovate and make a profit. And so if they can do something right that doesn't totally disrupt their business model, they'll do it.
Okay, thanks.
Brian?
Yeah, I also want to thank Pierre. I always look at what he's doing to see what's newest area around nutritional labeling. And I wanted to ask him a little bit about 80 because, you know, one of the things that we found looking at the guiding stars from a couple of papers was that not only did you see great heterogeneity across categories, but across individuals. So survey data showed that very few people had any intended to use these labels, but some people do. And when we look at household level data for these campaigns to both the guiding stars labeling program, we found those people in sort of the middle who were affected. So people who already bought products, you know, they buy healthy, people who bought junk, and it's again the people who were more on the fringe who might get shifted. And I wonder if any of retail partners are going to provide household level data where you can sort of examine influence as of customer type.
So there was a bit of an echo, so I don't, you know, excuse me if I don't answer everything, but you're totally, so we had household level data. And in fact, we even had a survey of consumers in which we were able to get their shopper cards, and we were hoping to mix the two. But then because of privacy laws, we were unable to do that. And so in the report that we did for, not in the paper, but in the report for the government, we actually looked at people who bought cheap products to try to look at this heterogeneity. And we find by and large the same ranking, but you're totally right that there's a huge heterogeneity and that in general, those effects, those cognitive nudges, I call them, they really work on the people who are already healthy. You know what? Because people who are not healthy have shown by definition that they don't care about nutrition. So if you tell them about nutrition, they still won't care about it. And I think this is a big issue with all of these cognitive nudges, which is why in our meta-analysis, you know, we really show that nudges that are trying to change behavior without informing or without telling you that these green beans are healthy, but telling you they're delicious, or just changing the portion size, tend to be much more effective than those that are hoping to have an effect by informing you about healthiness. And the socioeconomic gradient of obesity is there in every country. The big challenge, I totally agree, is not to make healthy people healthier, is to make people who are not healthy, who tend to be people with lower level of education and income, healthier. And that's a big challenge. And these labels, unfortunately, I doubt that they're able to do that at a scale we want.
John, you're next.
Well, Brian took my question. Good question. Yeah, that was, and yeah, it was just about my original question was around just heterogeneity in the data, and were you able to find any subsets for whom there was a bigger impact and an ability to make an inference about what the downstream opportunities may be based on that? But you pulled the data privacy trump card, so I won't pursue that question. But a very interesting problem, and maybe some replication in a market like the US that's a little more, or China that's a little more liberal, could do that. But those governments are unlikely to put up $2 million to ask the fundamental question. So hooray for France. Okay, now to my other question. And it goes back to your comment about, look, we have a kind of weak effect here, 0.1 on an individual level in a very specific thing, in a very specific super high power experiment. But you observe this kind of Hawthorne effect thing, that just because we put these labels on the thing, the manufacturers are beginning to look at it. And I'm wondering whether the time scale it may be a little off here. We have on the one hand, at least in the US, government regulation, trying to clamp down on sodas in cities, and posting calories on menus, and there are all kinds of interests in doing that, kind of pushing forward a slower moving cultural effect. So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are about those kinds of slower moving dynamics. You've already talked about, the effect on the demand side, and what sort of experiment or data or research, framework we might be able to adopt, other than simply letting time pass and try the experiment once again, that might speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, it's only anecdotal evidence that I have, that this disconnect between demand and supply. But I think I'm fairly confident, for talking to lots of companies, that they really do take it seriously. And now we know that this thing will repeat itself with the environmental labels, the carbon footprint, etc. Which my guess is they're probably going to have also a low effect, especially with the multiplication of labels, on demand, and probably a big effect on supply. So I'm not sure what is the right way to look at it, but I would really want to emphasize just the goal of these companies that have embarked into really massive rethink of their business model, because they don't want to be the bad guys, because they want to be able to continue to hire people, and they don't want to be like tobacco. Okay, so I don't know what's the right framework here to look at it, but based on this analysis we've done in another paper that I mentioned in Cereals, one thing that we found is these companies that tended to be the most nutritious conscious tended to be smaller, privately owned companies. The big multinational ones, they're market driven. If consumers say, I want something that is natural and I don't care about nutrition, or clean, or whatever that means, they will do it. But those smaller companies that tend, and one thing we did just to approach this, we looked at the name of the companies. And if the name of the company mentioned something like health and nutrition, one was called Left Coast Naturals, I remember. And then we looked at those companies, and we find that they tended to have products that were healthier, objectively speaking, based on nutrition. But I think this opens another kind of worms, which is that there is no really established way for consumers to think what is healthy. Consumers are not just looking at nutrition, they're looking at things like amount of processing, whether it's natural, plant-based, and it's a big mess. And I think one thing that we need to be careful, and that's something else that I've done, is to avoid talking about taste versus health. There are many ways to be healthy, and they don't align. And so 10 years worth of studies again in the future on this point, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, I think that we only have time for one last question.
Yeah, so I love this research. Thank you so much. So based on your comments, right, and of the judges, that kind of informing consumers doesn't seem to have that much of an effect. So are there other things in your experience that would work? And I'm going back to a very cool UK campaign, Fight Your Vegetables, which came up in the IPA effectiveness judging this year, right? So there was this campaign that tried to convince school kids that vegetables were the enemies. Instead of telling them veggies are good, which everybody knows, it said, look, the vegetables try to take over the world. So this week you should eat broccoli to defeat them, and the next week carrots. And so they were able to show, because they had a different vegetable every week, that unfortunately there didn't seem to be much of a long-term effect. So do you think that, you know, any of these more, you know, less conventional approaches would, you know, would be more interesting than informing consumers?
So if I have half a minute, you know, I just want to draw attention to that paper, because that's exactly what we looked at. We say, you know, in one word, you know, healthy eating is not a knowing problem, it's a doing problem. Yep. You and I know we need to eat vegetables and drink water and not beer. We're not doing it. Why? Because the costs are now and the benefits are in the future, and who cares? So effective nudges. For example, if you promote your beans, saying that there are antioxidants, etc., sales go down. If you say that there are sizzling Sichuan beans, delicious, sales go up. Size enhancements. You know, don't get me started because I've studied it so much, but portions have increased so much. You know, Coca-Cola used to have only one size, 19 ounces, centiliters, 6.5 ounces. Today, it's less than the kids menu, the kids cup. So all of these things that don't require to actually persuade or inform consumers, but directly change. Convenience enhancements. If you put the fruits at the beginning of the line in the cafeteria, and the orange is peeled, it's pre-cut, you put it directly in people's mouth, then they will eat it, okay? So I think everything that has to do with, you know, I say talk to the hand, you know, change the environment instead of, it's easier than just informing people. And I know my time is up, so I will stop, and because I want to listen to everybody else. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.